As a Santa Sabina College alumni, or alumnus, it's an absolute honour and a delight to be here to celebrate such excellence and achievement in all of you. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. That incredible piece of music was such a beautiful way to make that acknowledgement. The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation is where we are today, and also the Durug people, the land on which the college stands. But rather than just acknowledging that, I would like us all to reflect on how much do we really know and understand about our First Nations people and the land that they nurtured for more than 65,000 years. What can we learn from them regarding sustainability, given their deep respect for the land, the waters, and the sky? In my family, I'm number 5 of 6 kids. My parents were both doctors and researchers. They were curious and adventurous people, my most favourite kind of people. And I'm so pleased that my mother is here today. When I was little, we lived in the US for about a year, a little over a year, and Mrs. Black was my year 1 teacher in Philadelphia, a city in the US. She kept me back one afternoon. She said I had to stay back until I learned how to find words in a dictionary, because everyone else in the class could. Looking back at this, I was quite young. I was only just 6, if that. And I remember because it was the first time that I realised that I can do things if I apply myself. Nothing is really too hard. I had that aha moment. I got the hang of something, of completely understanding what was required, what was necessary for me to achieve. From there, the aha moments just kept coming. I loved them so much. I sought them out. I have never stopped to this day. I thrived at Santa Sabina under the principal back then of Sister Judith and Miss O'Shea, and my chemistry teacher, Diane Reed, who I am still in touch with. You see, Mrs. Reed was someone who thought outside the box. Her teaching method was to push our thinking, answer our own question. She encouraged curious thought and ideas-driven learning. From our late teens, this is back in the 1980s, she was asking us to think about climate change back then. Every time you get in the car, girls, you are using fossil fuel, she would remind us. Try walking, try cycling, she would say. Later, when I was studying in America, I realised that the extraordinary is only achieved when we think big and we think outside the box. What I loved most about studying in America was that they celebrated clever people and clever ideas. My American experiences back then taught me other things too: optimism, confidence, ambition. These attributes are not always celebrated in women, but these traits have given me really important cut-through throughout my career, and in return, I celebrate clever people and clever ideas, just like Mrs. Reed did. It so happens that sadly her husband died of cancer earlier this year, and she reached out to me. When we reconnected, I told her about the impact that she had had on me, that my learning was awakened by my Santa Sabina influences, and she was absolutely amazed. The educators at Santa Sabina helped shape my path to becoming Professor of Translational Research, Medical Oncology at the University of Sydney, and the co-medical director of Melanoma Institute Australia. Because at Santa Sabina, I learned there is nothing better than an idea. There is no idea that is too silly, and even ideas you think that are not very clever can start a discussion that is important and big. Don't be afraid. Timing is limited this evening, and I really wanted to talk about tanning and how this is not something to celebrate. A suntan is not glamorous. It's actually a sign of your skin cells in trauma. Melanoma is a type of skin cancer. It's the deadliest form. And did you know that melanoma, the deadliest form of skin cancer, is caused largely by UV sun exposure? So in my clinic, which I came from today, I see the pain, the suffering, the heartache when melanoma spreads around the body and invades the lung, for example, the liver, the brain. People die from melanoma. In fact, someone dies from melanoma in this country every 6 hours. Someone is diagnosed with melanoma every 30 minutes. We are the champions of melanoma. It's the most common cancer in Australia in 20 to 39-year-olds. We need to stop what we call the Kardashian effect. That is, things like glamorizing tanning on social media and by influencers. Don't give them that power over you. You're an individual. It's not cool. And always think of sun safety, especially during your outdoor sports. So veritas, it means truth. From today, I want you all to be the change makers the world needs regarding tanning, and share the truth about the dangers instead of the myth that it's healthy. I know a little bit about being a change maker. I'm a medical oncologist, I'm a clinical trialist, which means I discover new medicines to help people tackle their cancer. At Melanoma Institute, we have lots of different experts. We see the most melanoma patients in the world. We do research across all the parts of melanoma. We answer questions like what causes melanoma? Sunbeds cause melanoma, by the way. Which melanoma comes back and spreads, which don't? What treatments actually work? But my expertise means that I help companies to make their medicines. I call these drug therapies, or drugs, but these are medical drugs. I review their drug therapies. I design clinical trials to test their drugs in people with cancer. I advise on whether I think this is worth pursuing or not. And then I do the trials to treat my patients, particularly with melanoma. This is how I find cures. Innovation, creativity, thinking outside the box. It's my passion and it drives my expertise. I never stop learning. The melanoma treatments I developed in humans with leading cancer researchers around the world have broken new ground, and many thousands of lives are saved as a result of this, not just in melanoma, but many other cancers now, but led by melanoma, now in lung cancer, kidney cancer, head and neck cancer. But in May last year, Richard, my good friend and colleague, was diagnosed with what we call a grade 4 IDH wild-type unmethylated glioblastoma. It is the very worst type of brain cancer. No one survives it, and even if you try to cut it out, it nearly always comes back. With the standard treatment, not many people survive more than 2 years. I've known Richard for more than 25 years. His glioblastoma diagnosis was absolutely devastating. His prognosis was terrible. That means his survival. I scoured the world for trials for his type of cancer that he might be eligible for. There were none, and I'm a clinical trialist. So I had an idea. Maybe I could use my expertise in drug therapy development and design to treat incurable brain cancer. As scientists and as researchers, it's critical that we all push the medical field forward. I'm compelled to do this. So I invented a novel drug therapy plan. Richard consented to have that novel drug therapy, and I developed and implemented this world-first approach. It wasn't easy. It wasn't as easy as it sounds. Not only did I have to gather the team to implement it, I had to ensure that the scientific analyses of the brain cancer tissue, once it was surgically removed, and the blood was done properly. Women who work with me stepped up to help get my novel plan done. Dr. Brinda Shivalingam, a brain cancer surgeon who I'd worked with in melanoma cancer for more than 10 years, exclaimed, "Georgina, I've been waiting 10 years for an approach like this in glioblastoma," the type of brain cancer Richard had. You see, Richard was in Poland when the brain cancer was discovered after he'd had a seizure. Returning to Australia, he felt so sad. He was scared. As a pathologist, that's his job, he diagnoses diseases by looking down the microscope. So he knew what sort of disease he had and what lay ahead. When I presented my idea to him, the ray of hope that I gave him was obvious. I see this all the time in my melanoma patients. He came alive. His spirits lifted just with hope. Other expert women gave me the strength to implement my very novel plan. Professor Helen Rizos, an incredible scientist, a leader of the Melanoma Institute's research committee, shared my vision. Helen and I gathered the Institute's translational research teams, the head of Biobank, Nick, the mentee now that I work with, Dr. Inesh De Silva, to plan the scientific analyses, and we began strategizing about what we would do. I turned my own medical oncology team. I turned to them to implement this plan. Maria Gonzalez, Director of Clinical Care and Trials, she helped me apply to all the authorities. Kate Willis, a specialist nurse, she and I look after all my melanoma patients with me, but also with my other doctors. She's an expert in immunotherapy. And Dr. Helen Wheeler is a specialist in medicine for brain cancer, and she agreed to support my plan. There was risk, but the potential benefits were huge. Huge. Richard may survive, beat the unbeatable. At worst, he will leave a legacy, as all my patients do who participate in experimental therapy trials. And my team will gain knowledge to help future brain cancer patients. Today, it's been 18 months since his diagnosis, and he's doing well. The brain cancer has not come back. The scientific results from the lab we have generated are profound, but there is a long, long, long way to go. It takes time. You've got to do it right. You've got to ensure that you follow pure scientific process. It would be easy for us to get carried away, but we must follow the process so that we do not jeopardize this for future patients. You see, one patient is not evidence of prolonged survival due to the treatment. 5% of people with this type of brain cancer can survive 3 years on that standard 20-year-old treatment. So I started planning the clinical trial only weeks after I had commenced the treatment with Richard. That is what good science does. You have an idea, you have a hypothesis, then you go about proving it. Within 3.5 months of Richard's seizure, I had secured the drugs, designed the trial, and handed it over to a young and up-and-coming brain cancer specialist at what we call Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, Dr. Jim Whittle. He's led the protocol development with help from colleagues in the US. So my message is this: it takes boldness, it takes bravery, and a lot of energy to challenge the status quo. That's how we innovate. Remember, science happens with incremental failures, incremental successes. I can only do what I do after decades of research before me and the deep experience as an expert trained for years. You have to stick at it, put in the time. I say to my daughters, the youngest is actually just starting year 12 now, think about 1, what you're good at, and 2, what you enjoy, and then put in the time and have the courage and the bravery and persist. For us in the cancer field, courage is always needed to push the boundaries, backed by science for the benefit of all cancer patients. So one of the most joyful things that has happened this year is that Richard and I were named Australians of the Year. It's an incredible honour. And the award gives me an opportunity to share my story, to inspire students just like you to make this beautiful nation a much better place. So besides tanning, I want to leave you with something else to think about today. I could have spent today telling you why it's important to consider science as a career, but instead, I hope my story has justified why you should consider science as a career. Not only will more clever women, clever people with clever ideas make the nation a better place, but science will give you the courage to change the world, and that change will give the world the courage to celebrate you. Thank you.